Hey guys! Tonight we step into a version of history you were never shown in school. The dim, smoke-lit rooms behind the thrones, where the real rulers whisper, bargain, and pull strings while the kings on the stage smile for the crowd. You're standing right there in the middle of it, blinking as your eyes adjust, feeling the weight of too many secrets hovering just above your head. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, and you get the quiet sense that if you take one wrong step, you probably won't survive this. But don't worry, I'll walk slowly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and your local time in the comments, because I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the shadowy corridor of early power, long before the 19th century, before telegraphs and nation-states, before governments looked anything like the polished structures we imagine today. You expect to see emperors barking orders, but instead you find something stranger. Clusters of advisors, scribes, accountants, and foreign guests murmuring among themselves while the so-called ruler waits for their nod. It's a bit like watching a modern CEO freeze at a meeting until the PR manager sends a reassuring thumbs up. Different century, same energy. The first mainstream historical fact hits you as you drift closer. In places like ancient Egypt, the king often didn't run the kingdom. High officials, the viziers, controlled everything from grain storage to legal courts, leaving the pharaoh to handle ceremonies and photo ops carved into stone. Historians still argue whether some pharaohs understood how little power they truly had, or whether they just played along because the system needed a shiny symbol at the top. You step into another hall, and suddenly the scent of incense, spices, and warm oil fills your nose. A group of men wearing simple linen, nothing extravagant, stand in a circle around clay tablets filled with numbers and transactions. These are the real handlers of the empire, the bureaucrats who keep the machine running so smoothly that the monarch looks effortlessly competent. You watch them assign food rations, approve building projects, and handle taxes with terrifying precision. They're basically the ancient version of that one co-worker who secretly keeps the entire office from collapsing while the boss takes credit. But here comes your first fringe tidbit. In some early cultures, a king could technically be dismissed, yes, fired, through ritual humiliation by the priestly class if he stopped performing sacred duties correctly. Imagine HR walking in with a ceremonial drum and telling the CEO, "Sorry, Brad, the gods are disappointed. Please hand in your crown." You notice how everyone around you moves with cautious familiarity, like they've known their role since birth. That's what makes these hidden rulers so powerful. They aren't temporary. Kings die, dynasties crumble, but institutions, especially secretive administrative networks, survive like vines growing through stone ruins. You drift past a scribe who's muttering calculations. The wax tablet in his hand contains more influence than the jeweled sword of the monarch in the next room. One wrong number, and a city starves. One adjusted report, and a general loses his command. The king, meanwhile, is busy approving a festival that someone else planned months ago. By now, you realize you're seeing the first layer of the world's oldest illusion. The crown was rarely the mind in control. It was the mask, beautiful, polished, and replaceable. The real rulers were the ones who never needed to raise their voices because the machinery of the state obeyed them automatically.
You move deeper into the dim corridor until the air shifts from the scent of oil and papyrus to something colder, sharper, like a room that hasn't forgotten the weight of centuries. A faint glimmer draws your eyes upward. The ceiling is painted with constellations, each star pinned with obsessive accuracy. You take a slow step inside, and for a moment it feels like the sky itself is hanging just a few feet over your head. Here you meet the real code keepers of the ancient world, the astronomer priests. You watch them glide around a stone table carved with zodiac signs, their fingers brushing over symbols the way modern analysts scroll through charts. These weren't just holy men. They were scientists, mathematicians, timekeepers. And more importantly, they were political powerhouses. You see a nervous ruler pacing behind them, waiting for the reading that will determine whether he goes to war or just stays home and sacrifices a goat. It's basically the ancient version of waiting for your lawyer to read the fine print before you sign something life-ruining. A mainstream historical fact settles into the room like dust. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings refused to act without first consulting the temple astrologers. Entire military campaigns were postponed because Jupiter was in an uncooperative mood. That's right, you could have a fully trained army ready to march, but if the stars looked a little cranky, everyone went back to bed. You step closer and notice how the priests use a mix of observation, mathematics, and a little dramatic flair. One leans over a bowl of water to read its ripples, and you swear he pauses just long enough to build suspense. Historians still argue whether these omens were purely symbolic or whether the priests genuinely believed the cosmos micromanaged earthly politics. But what's beyond debate is their influence. Their words could make or break a ruler overnight. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some cultures, misinterpreting a celestial sign wasn't just embarrassing, it was a crime. There are tablets detailing punishments for astrologers who got the sky wrong. Imagine being hauled into court because Saturn wasn't where you thought it was. Sorry, Your Honor, I forgot to carry the one. You drift toward a side chamber where king and priest stand face to face. Their silhouettes flicker against torchlight, and you sense a quiet negotiation happening beneath the surface. The king wants good news. The priest wants leverage, and both know the other can ruin him if things go wrong. It's a dance so old you can practically hear the floorboards complaining. You notice something else, something subtle. The priests don't just interpret the heavens, they control calendars, festivals, taxes, agriculture cycles. When to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, when to panic. Everything flows through their hands like water through a carved channel. They decide when the year begins. They decide when the gods approve a coronation. They even decide which days are too unlucky to sign treaties. If you've ever used astrology to justify texting your ex, just know ancient governments were built on that same energy, only with significantly higher stakes. You watch the king finally bow his head. The decision is made. The stars have spoken. Or, more accurately, the priests have. As you follow the ruler out of the chamber, you realize how deep this celestial influence went. The king may wear the crown, but the heavens, translated by the priestly class, set the rules of the game. And whether the stars truly cared or not, well, that's a debate we're still having.
You step out of the temple into the bustling streets of a port city, where the salty breeze tangles with the scent of spices and roasting meat. Ships creak against the docks, laden with cloth, grain, and the occasional exotic animal meant to impress visiting dignitaries. But the real cargo, if you look closely, isn't on the boats. It's in ledgers, letters, and the subtle nods exchanged between sharply dressed merchants leaning against market stalls. This is where money talks, and it doesn't whisper, it commands. You watch a tall man with a carefully trimmed beard hand a sealed letter to a runner who darts off into the crowd. That letter could change the fate of an entire province. You see it. Merchants were not just traders. They were miniatured governments, wielding influence like monarchs, but without the parade or the throne. Historians still argue whether some early banking families were the secret architects of national borders, or simply opportunists capitalizing on chaos. Either way, they had power that kings sometimes only dreamed of. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Medici family in Renaissance Florence didn't just lend money. They controlled elections, placed allies in key offices, and financed wars. They effectively ran a city-state while allowing figurehead leaders to perform for the public. You feel a shiver thinking how quietly terrifying this is. A family calculating interest rates could dictate life and death far beyond any one street or palace. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some merchant guilds had their own private armies disguised as caravans. Imagine strolling past a caravan of cloth bales, only to realize the wagons hide armed men ready to enforce trade agreements, or silently remove a competitor. History doesn't usually show the world like this, but the streets you walk today have echoes of these shadowed networks. You follow the runner into a dimly lit alley where a council of traders hunches over maps and notes. They whisper about upcoming conflicts, potential alliances, and which ruler might fall first. Wars and marriages are analyzed like spreadsheets. Coins dictate policy more than swords. You realize that in many regions, a king's marriage alliance could be brokered by a merchant who never set foot in the palace. You notice a small, almost comedic scene. A scribe accidentally drops a pile of coins, and two guild members dive in with surprising agility, scooping them up before anyone notices. You can't help but smile. Money moves fast, whether in an alley or across an empire. As the sun sets and lanterns flicker on the streets, you see the complex web of influence. Kings performing, priests advising, merchants calculating, and you, just a spectator, realize how delicate the balance of power really was. The ruler may hold a crown, but the people who control the flow of wealth, they hold the true levers of history. And you can practically hear them whispering, "Don't look too closely."
You wander through the echoing corridors of a sprawling palace, your footsteps muffled against the thick rugs, the air heavy with perfume and candle smoke. The official gates are closed, the ceremonial rooms silent, but behind hidden doors, the real game of influence is underway. Courtiers, advisors, and those you might call shadow operatives glide through passages like ghosts, carrying whispers, subtle threats, and rumors that could topple rulers without a single sword drawn. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In 16th century France, the royal court was a hotbed of intrigue, where favored courtiers could make or break ministers and even sway kings' decisions with a few well-timed words. The labyrinthine etiquette ensured that a single whisper in the right ear carried more weight than a battle. Historians still argue whether monarchs were ever truly in control or if they were puppets in a dance choreographed by those who mastered rumor and subtle persuasion. You pause by a curtained window, peering into a candlelit study where an advisor slides a litter under the door. It's small, insignificant to the untrained eye, yet the message it contains could determine the fate of entire provinces. The assassins, messengers, and courtiers operate like a quiet orchestra, each note carefully placed, each movement calculated. And unlike the obvious spectacle of kings and generals, their power is almost invisible, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some European courts, poisoned gloves or letters were considered almost routine diplomatic tools. There's a story of a courtesan who memorized secret messages embedded in embroidery, a literal stitch of espionage. You can't help but chuckle at the absurdity while simultaneously shivering at the stakes. Imagine having to check every handkerchief for hidden instructions before shaking someone's hand. You follow a shadowy figure into a smaller chamber where a queen's confidant waits. Matriarchs, often underestimated, manipulate outcomes from behind veils of propriety. They broker alliances, control finances, and decide which young nobles marry or follow from grace. You remember that earl in the merchant alley and the priest's celestial charts. This is the human version of those networks. No divine insight needed, just sharp minds and sharper tongues. As you move deeper into the palace's hidden layers, you notice a pattern. Control isn't about titles, it's about information. Who knows what, who tells whom, and who could act without being seen. Every rumor, every slip of paper, every whispered conversation becomes a tool or a weapon. You think ordinary observation won't reveal these secret forces. You have to sense them like feeling the wind before a storm. And as you stepped into another dim little hall, you realize the shadow network isn't chaotic. It's meticulously structured, trained over generations. The kings may parade, the armies may march, but the invisible players shape the narrative, decide the fates of dynasties, and sometimes, quietly, remove a king entirely.
You leave the palace corridors behind, stepping into a sunlit courtyard where banners flutter lazily in the breeze. At first glance, it seems peaceful. Children playing, gardeners tending roses, servants scurrying about. But your trained eye notices the subtle maneuvers. A hand extended here, a glance exchanged there. Every motion has intent. You realize that even in broad daylight, influence is never absent. It's just less dramatic. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. In the Ottoman Empire, harem women, often dismissed as merely ornamental, exercised enormous political power. Mothers of sultans, consorts, and palace officials orchestrated appointments, decisions, and even wars from behind lattice screens. Historians still argue whether the sultan ever truly acted independently or if he was a sophisticated front for these intricate human networks. You wander toward the outer gardens, imagining the whispers that floated along these paths centuries ago. Quirky and fascinating, some matriarchs communicated by secret code, involving flowers, placing specific blooms in vases, arranging petals in a pattern, conveying orders or warnings. It sounds almost silly until you realize that one misplaced bloom could alter a succession plan or prevent an assassination. Gardens were not just for beauty, they were alive with strategy. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the same webs of influence stretching from palaces to marketplaces, from astrologers to merchants. Shadow diplomats negotiated borders and alliances while appearing to serve ceremonial functions. Scholars and engineers guarded knowledge that could give a ruler a temporary edge, yet they were often manipulated by hidden networks themselves. Ruthless tax collectors ensured compliance, subtly bending priorities in favor of those who truly understood power. Peasant revolts, too, remind you that the ground beneath all this opulence could shift unpredictably. Sometimes collective pressure from the seemingly powerless toppled an entire dynasty. You take a slow breath, letting your mind absorb the tapestry of hidden rulers, invisible puppeteers, and subtle manipulators. Every dynasty you know, every history book you've read contains a shadow narrative where crowns are illusions and true authority moves quietly like a river under the ice. The sun dips lower, softening the light. You feel that gentle calm as the realization settles in. Power, in all its forms, has always been a blend of spectacle and subtlety, only visible to those patient enough to observe. And perhaps you muse with a wry smile. Some of these ancient mechanisms still echo today in ways we barely perceive. As the light fades further, the courtyard quiets, leaving you with only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of a river. You can almost feel the centuries breathe around you, each shadow a whisper, each breeze a secret carried across time. The tension of intrigue, plots, and subtle manipulation slowly loosens, replaced by the serene awareness that history, as chaotic and dramatic as it seems, is also a soft, intricate dance. You settle onto a stone bench, letting your fingers brush the cool surface. Imagine the hands that pressed coins, scribed letters, and arranged flowers centuries ago, the same hands that shaped empires while remaining unseen.
There is comfort in knowing that even the smallest actors can influence vast outcomes, and that human ingenuity, cunning, and connection leave traces long after crowns have corroded and walls have crumbled. Feel the gentle rhythm of the world around you. The sun warms your face. A bird sings somewhere high in a tree, and distant bells mark the slow passage of time. Let your mind drift to the corridors, marketplaces, and gardens you've walked at night. You've glimpsed the hidden powers, the whispered strategies, the invisible hands of history. And though the stories can be astonishing, even unsettling, they are now a part of you. Allow the quiet to settle. No rush, no urgency. Just the gentle unfolding of understanding, like the last glow of twilight slipping into evening. And in that calm, you realize history is not only about rulers and battles, it's about people, connections, and the unseen threads that hold it all together.